It was Christmas Eve of 2017, and citizens of Westfield were wrapping up last-minute presents. But there was somebody in the area who wasn't in the Christmas spirit, because that morning my dad found a letter on our porch, and whoever wrote it seemed pretty disturbed. The content of the letter wasn't exactly threatening towards us, but it was loosely implied that this person was sick, and they were thinking about acting on their feelings. Most of the letter was a reflection on domestic terrorism and tragedies that could have been prevented if people showed more compassion to the mentally ill. According to the police, several neighbors had received the same letter that morning, but they assured us not to worry, and that as long as we keep our doors locked, that there shouldn't be a problem. But the morning after Christmas, there was a problem, because my mum discovered that somebody vandalized our yard while we were sleeping, and our Christmas decorations were scattered all over our driveway. This could have been kids goofing around, but my mum got back in touch with the Westfield Police Department, and they assured her that they were looking into things. At the time, a stalker known as the Watcher had been active in the same part of town, who was known specifically for writing menacing letters, but had a very stylized way of writing. What was interesting about the Watcher is that he was fixated on one particular family who bought a house in 2014 and started getting letters from an unknown person. Before this family closed the deal on their property, no one in the neighborhood ever experienced this kind of harassment. So, because of the timing, some of their neighbors speculated that the family wrote those letters to themselves in an effort to fabricate a hoax. Yet, a lot of people believed them and were nervous about attracting this person's attention. So when these letters came on Christmas Eve, it was assumed that these were either from the Watcher or at least connected. I remember arguing back and forth with my parents because they wouldn't let me leave the house without supervision, even though I was 14, and as a teenager, the last thing you want is to be treated like a child. A year later, Derek Broadus came forward and admitted he wrote those letters on Christmas Eve. It was his family that the Watcher kept sending letters to, and the reason he wrote his own letter is because he wanted to show people what it felt like to not feel safe at your own house. People seemed to be more concerned with gossiping about Derek's family instead of being concerned with their safety, which made Derek resent a lot of people who lived in his neighborhood. Ever since they moved away, there have been no more Watcher letters, although Derek swears they didn't fabricate any of this and that him and his family were the victims of a relentless stalker. When I was driving home from my parents' cabin in 2010, it started snowing half through the drive, and the flakes were so huge that I could barely see the road ahead. So when a deer crossed the road in front of me, I couldn't see her until she was too close, so my reaction was to slam on the brakes and turn, which avoided the deer but led to me skidding across the road. I ended up inside of a ditch and had to call roadside assistance for help. They said they were sending someone right away, but they told me it could take an hour. After maybe 5 minutes of waiting, a car pulled up next to the ditch, and I saw a man get out wearing a trucker hat. At first, I thought he was trying to help me, but after we started talking, I realized there was something about his presence that gave me a bad feeling. He claimed to be a mechanic and offered me a ride, so I told him that while I appreciated the offer, another mechanic was on their way. What I thought was creepy is that he kept insisting when I declined his help, and he was aggressive about it too. I'm not sure if he noticed, but there was a can of mace in my purse, and I kept my hand clutched onto it in case he tried to get physical. But I saw a truck stop behind him, and it was like a massive weight had been lifted from my chest. There were 2 men who I saw get out of the truck and walked over to see if they could help. By nothing short of a miracle, the 3 of them successfully pushed me out of the ditch. It did seem like the first guy had a different motive, but he did help, most likely because he knew he would have looked more suspicious if he took off the moment other people came to help. I cancelled roadside assistance and drove home extremely carefully. For a minute I thought this guy was following me because his truck was behind me for quite a ways, but he eventually took an exit off the highway. This wasn't one of my favourite experiences by any means, but it wasn't exactly memorable, so by 2012 I pretty much forgot about all of this. I used to have a morning routine before work every day, where I would turn on the news as I got ready so I could stay in the loop with current events. And one morning they were talking about a man named Israel Keys, who had been arrested for the murders of 11 different people, and sometimes he would hold women captive for several days before he would carry out the murder. When Israel's mugshot was shown, my heart sunk into my stomach, because I recognized him as the driver who tried to lure me in his car. Not only did his face look familiar, but he was active in Vermont, and his weapons were found stashed away in a farmhouse only 20 miles away from St. Michael's College, which is where I was going to school. I can't help but to feel a bit of guilt that I didn't report his suspicious behavior, but even though I was put off by how hard he had tried to persuade me into leaving with him, there was no actual crime committed, so even if I did report it, there's not much the police could have done about my complaint. Only 2 days before Christmas, I tested positive for strep throat, so I had to stay home on Christmas Day instead of going to my uncle's. We opened presents in the morning, but I felt drained by the afternoon, so I spent the rest of the day in bed having a marathon of my favourite Christmas movies. My mum brought me a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup for dinner, and eating did wonders to alleviate my headache, but as the evening went on, I started feeling weaker. Not to mention I was shaking because I had the chills, so all I wanted to do was try to sleep off the feeling. I shut off the lights and turned down the volume of the TV, although I left it on since I sleep better with a low amount of background noise. Somewhere within this time frame I must have slipped into a fever dream, because the movie Elf with Will Ferrell was on, which I've seen more times than I can even count. Since I was so familiar with every scene of the movie, I quickly realized something was off. Some of the scenes were out of order, and a lot of the dialogue was incoherent. But the one detail I'll never forget is that I could suddenly smell my grandfather's scent, and when I looked at the TV, I saw that he was inside of this movie. Instead of Will Ferrell playing Buddy, my grandfather was in his place. And when he noticed I could see him, he looked at me with such a warm smile that I immediately felt a deep sense of comfort. It soon became apparent that everyone in this movie was deceased. As somebody who is totally awake and aware right now, it would be obvious that this was either a hallucination or a dream. But at the time, my mind was altered, and I never even questioned what I was seeing. The weirdest and most important piece of this experience is that my grandpa actually spoke to me. At first it sounded like gibberish, but then he looked at me in my eyes, and he was very clear about what he said. He gave me the instructions to go downstairs and wake up my parents immediately, because my virus was getting worse and it was crucial for me to get to a hospital. As he said this, I felt my body slip back into a waking state. The movie went back to normal and was still going, so I couldn't have been in this dream for more than an hour. But I felt cramps all over and my body was covered in goosebumps, so I took my grandpa's advice and told my parents what I was feeling. It's a good thing I listened to his advice, because by the time we made it to urgent care, I was running a temperature of 108 degrees. If I waited any longer to find medical attention, there's a chance that my outcome would have been different. And now when I even feel mildly sick, I keep an eye on my temperature, since there's always a chance this could happen again.